Very good evening, everyone. And this is your Shrija Santanam, Community Manager at DC Cap. Thank you so much, everyone, for registering to today's speaker series. I hope like everyone is staying safe and keeping well. So let me use this opportunity to give a quick intro about DC Cap, organization behind the speaker series. DCCAP is a digital commerce agency helping businesses and brands abroad to create e-commerce storefronts. So that said, during these challenging times, being in the lockdown, it's very much important for every one of us to hone our skills to learn new things. To facilitate learning for our employees as well as for the general community, DCCAP started hosting the speaker series, a virtual event that happens every Friday. So, through speaker series, we bring in distinguished thought leaders, technology masters, and change makers around the globe to address on varied topics which matters most to the community. So, having said that, today I'm very glad and proud to welcome Rohini, Senior Developer Advocate at Amazon Web Services. And she brings over a decade of experience in the IT industry, primarily focusing on cloud computing technologies with AWS since Jan 2014. She has worked on multiple roles, including being a solution architect in India as a senior advocate. She focuses. She has been leading conversations with businesses of all industries and sizes on innovation as they deploy critical workloads onto the cloud. She is passionate to share her experiences on building architectures with best practices and help strengthen builders for tomorrow. Rohini frequently speaks at conferences and community meetups and online events, and she is here with us for our community meetup speaker series. And thank you so much, Rohini, for joining us today. And today she is about to enlighten us on intriguing topic that is getting started with serverless architectures. Stay put, and she's going to answer many lingering questions. I hope like you guys will have a great session today. And should you have any questions, feel free to raise your questions in the Q&A section that you can see at the bottom of your Zoom window. And once again, thank you, Rohini, for honoring our stage and looking forward to your session. And over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Shrija. This is amazing, and thanks for the opportunity. I'll just share my screen. Give me a second, and I'm hoping you can see my screen. Awesome.
Yes, of course.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for joining for the session. Shrija has already talked about me, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. But if you have more questions about AWS or anything with respect to cloud, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn. Just on 4th of July, I also launched my own YouTube channel, so not many videos there. But if you're interested, you can just subscribe to the channel, and I can always answer a lot of questions. So let's start with today's session. Today's session is more on serverless. While I will like to talk about a lot of serverless services from AWS, I do want you to have more insights into how you can have build serverless applications, what kind of architecture patterns are there, and maybe I'll give you some pointers that you'll learn out of this and build awesome projects. So let's start with computing evolution. I believe that we need to understand why a certain thing or a certain evolution has come in place. So we have seen a paradigm shift on compute, right? So not too long ago, in some places, even now, right, there are someone called as server huggers. These are people who love to maintain their own data centers, but they are not able to leverage all the innovation that's happening in the cloud, right? So making a new service means they are building a new team to build, operate, and maintain that particular service. And they have to renew their hardware regularly to keep up with the pace. And then, of course, they have some upfront capital expenditure before they can do any kind of innovation. Then there are people, a good set of customers who are moving to cloud, right? And they're leveraging virtual machines for the agility, for the breadth of functionality that a cloud provides, the pay as you go pricing, the global deployment. If you understand from an AWS perspective, we have regions and availability zones across the globe. Cloud provides you a lot of elasticity, so you don't have to plan ahead of time. So while these are the basic reasons why customers move to cloud, and cost is typically discussion starter, we believe that agility and innovation are at the top of any reasons to move to cloud, right? So you can set up your infrastructure for an experiment fearlessly, and you can terminate it if it does not work. So it helps you increase the amount of innovation in your own company. Then the third wave is of containers, right? So which gives a high degree of mobility. So if customers are running something on-prem and they want to keep those investments, but they still want to run production workloads in the cloud, containers allow them to have agnosticity to the applications. So containers allow to package your applications and move them between different computing environments. It starts a lot more rapidly than virtual machines, and you get a fancy toolchain to work with. So that's great. But then they are still managing servers in the backend, right? They're still updating the operating system, they're still patching the operating system. And then there is serverless. So where you don't have to worry about any of that, right? So customers tell us containers are great, but managing the infrastructure is undifferentiated heavy lifting for them. It takes too much of their time and spent in, correlating the infrastructure, and not enough time is actually spent on the code itself. So the application or the even application architecture. So which is where they want to focus. Now, this is exactly what is offered by serverless. You build code and let somebody else worry about the infrastructure. So I keep getting this funny question that people ask: serverless means there's no servers? Of course, there are servers. They are in the backend and they are managed by someone else. You worry about the code that you're executing or the database access that you need, and you're just going to pay for the amount of time your code has been running, or for the amount of data that you've stored in a particular data store. I hope that gives you a good distinction about serverless itself. So let's start with an application architecture that we had many years ago, right? So one that many of our customers continue to use today, right? So a traditional three-tier web architecture. Now, this architecture is functional, but as we know, it doesn't enable you to move as fast as you probably want to. So here's a modern architecture of the same type. And yes, it does indeed look a lot similar to a three-tier architecture as well. There are a lot of similar elements as well. There's a data layer, there's a business logic layer, there's a presentation layer as well. But then there are a few key differences here. Sorry. So there are a few key differences here, right? Specifically, what you're looking here is could be a single microservice, and many customers have dozens of such microservices, dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of such microservices to improve the scalability and resilience of their architecture or their application. Now, microservices is a very big topic which we are not definitely dealing with today, but we'll talk a bit more about how you can use this with the serverless platform and how you can build architectures with respect to that. The second differentiation here is for integration and for communication within the microservice and amongst the different APIs. We are using a combination of queues, messages, and events. Okay. And third one is to showcase a purpose-built data strategy rather than just using a single database across the entire application. We are showing that you can use any database that is particularly suitable for that particular microservice. And finally, what you can't see here is that you store state. Now, because your containerized or your serverless applications to an extent must be stateless, you need to store that state in some kind of data store. So these are the five vectors, you could say, that help you build or characterize modern applications, right? So these technology decisions around, what kind of integrations you're going to use, what kind of data stores are you going to use, how is your state management going to be, these are going to impact your application and ultimately your business. Right. So modern applications can be categorized across these five vectors, like what are the architectural patterns that you have used, how modular your services are, what are the or what is the operational model, as serverless and as automated, as managed as possible, right? What are your software delivery practices? Are they automated? Are they standardized across your different applications or microservices? The management and governance, like application is going to be everyone's responsibility rather than just a purview of one team, right? And what is your data strategy? Is it distributed? Is it fit for purpose? Applications built in this way will enable you to achieve the agility you need to innovate on behalf of your customers. So in this session, we will discuss some of the basic architectural patterns and benefits of modular architectures with serverless in mind. Okay, so by the end of the session, you should understand how to create and benefit from APIs and event-driven architectures. This is our end goal for the session today. So let's talk about serverless. What is serverless? When we say serverless, we mean it's the removal of the undifferentiated heavy lifting that is server operations. Now, this is an important distinction for a lot of customers because it allows our customers to focus on building the application rather than management and scaling of the infrastructure to support the application. It means not thinking about infrastructure or scaling where you only pay for what you value, with availability and security is built into that managed serverless service itself. Okay, serverless is not just Lambda. This happens with me a lot, and everyone says, "Oh, we use Lambda. We are now serverless." Serverless is not just Lambda. It's an operational model that spans many different categories. You can find a lot of information at the link that I've mentioned on the slide. This will give you access to a microsite where you can find a lot more information about each of these services and more. Today, we are covering few of the services in some detail, like we are going to talk about Lambda, API Gateway, step functions. I understand it's a lot to understand in an hour. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you quick introduction, and I'm going to give you a few quick pointers that are important to understand about a particular service and how that fits into architectures. Okay. So before we go into these services, I have to let you understand the operational responsibility models that AWS has. Now, if you can see, our layers of abstraction is through the shared responsibility model. Now, it's a scale of convenience to control. So here you will find a lot more control, where the more you go towards your right, you will find a lot of convenience of using these services. Now, you as a customer have the choice to select any of these services. So it's like a Lego block, right? So you can select what parts to be used to make that particular application. So ultimately, our goal here is to provide you more choice and also to keep pushing this line in a direction so that you are responsible for less and less, and we manage more of your infrastructure. Now, this will hopefully free up your time to focus on your business logic for your company. So as an example, we are looking at the compute spectrum, right? So this is a spectrum of the shared responsibility model where you have different options for compute. So if you see for EC2, we manage the physical hardware, software, networking facilities, the physical facilities, and up to the hypervisor level, right? Everything above an operating system is something you as a customer have to take care of, right? As we go up towards more opinionated services, you can see for Lambda, which is a serverless compute option, you can see that AWS now manages a lot of these for you, and you as a customer now have to focus on application code. Okay. And serverless, common serverless use cases can be amongst any of these. Okay, so you can build web applications, you can build some backends, you can also do a lot of data processing. A lot of services help you build machine learning models or chains that you want to create. A lot of chatbots are created with serverless. So there is a request, goes ahead, processes something, and comes back. If you've used Echo, the Echo Dots or Echoes that Amazon sells, We use Amazon Alexa in the backend. You can also build a lot of Alexa skills using serverless technologies and a lot of IT automation. For example, if you've been using AWS for a while and you know the virtual machines are called as EC2, Elastic Compute Cloud, and you create these virtual machines, let's say on a timely at at 9 a.m. in morning, start them up, and at 6 p.m. in the evening everyone stops working, so shut them down. You can do all these kind of automations and cron jobs using serverless. If you're interested to know more about how customers are using these, some real life stories about our customers, just go ahead and look at it at serverless. These are just small snapshot of customers who have been using our serverless technologies. So let's get into compute. We will look at, just to give you a quick idea about the compute options. The first one we have is serverless functions in the form of AWS Lambda. Now, AWS Lambda is the service name, and what you create inside it is called as functions. Okay, so Lambda offers great agility and economic benefits. With Lambda, developers just have to write the code in forms of functions and define a trigger to run this code. We'll go deeper into it, so don't worry if you don't get it in the first go. But Lambda will start, stop, scale automatically based on the usage load these functions receive. Okay. For another class of applications, you may want a little bit of more control over the networking or how your services are communicating with each other or what kind of packaging should look like. Your unit of work goes from being just a piece of code to maybe a container image that is stored in some kind of a registry, right? So many customers tell us, you know what, I'm okay to build my code, and I want to build it as a container image, but I don't want to worry about where is this cluster running, how many virtual servers it's running on, and what's happening underneath. I'm not interested in that. This is my container image. I just want to define it and deploy it. And you take care of the scaling and the orchestration of the entire container system that I have. And that's where actually Fargate sits in. The major distinction between the two, obviously, I mean, they have different working scale, but the difference is short-lived and long-running, right? So by short-lived, what we mean is today Lambda functions can execute for a maximum 15 minutes, okay, which in an event-driven world is a lot of time. But if you have applications or if your code needs to run more than 15 minutes, and remember, we are talking about a microservice, not an entire application, right? So if a microservice function needs to execute more than 15 minutes, then Fargate would be a better choice going forward. Today, we are just going to talk about Lambda in this session. So we just talked how Lambda can remove the responsibility for managing the infrastructure, okay? But you still have to write the code, right? And we want to make it easier for you to write the application code with Lambda. You can write application code for Lambda with your favorite IDEs in your favorite programming languages. You can create your own new application patterns, not necessarily the ones that I'll maybe discuss with you or the ones I'll show you how to read further, but you can create your own application patterns. Remember how I said it's a Lego system, so you can pick and choose what you need and build your own patterns. Finally, you choose a simple resource model for your functions. You just select memory. Let's say you say, this is my function, it needs a memory somewhere between 128 MB to 3 GB. You select and tell it what it needs. And the CPU and networking in the backend are allocated proportionately for that particular selection. So there's a lot of things here, and we will discuss those in detail. So when you think about serverless applications, this is the basic typical flow. Okay, there is an event source. Okay, there is a source from where an event source which will trigger a Lambda function. Okay, and this Lambda function will do some business logic processing. It will do certain activities. It would either go and call some other services, or it would go and store the information or the state in some kind of a data store. Okay, so this is a basic flow of your typical serverless application. Now, what are the different event sources? There are a lot of event sources that can trigger Lambda. So that could be any data stores. Like if you have you know, S3, it's like a simple storage service from AWS for objects, or a NoSQL key value data store like DynamoDB, or any endpoints, or even cron jobs and more. Okay, so these can be different event sources that can trigger the Lambda functions. I'm just going to take a breather here so that sinks in. So what we'll do is we'll quickly talk about the different execution model, and this is important. I know many people don't talk about this, and I've seen customers build Lambda applications and Lambda microservices, and then they complain that it's not working well, or it's getting more expensive, or it's not as good as it seems. It's because they don't understand the different execution models. They don't understand where these would fit in their application. So I'm going to try and make these simple and easy for you to understand. Okay. So the first one is synchronous communication. So services can be invoked by other services and must wait for a reply. Okay. This is considered as a blocking request because the invoking service cannot finish executing until it receives a response. So when you invoke a function synchronously, Lambda runs that function and waits for a response. So for example, you could be, doing a database query and you're waiting for the results to come back. As simple as that. So now that when the function execution ends, Lambda simply returns the response to the invoker and Lambda returns the response from the function's code with to the invoker with some additional data. So to make it simple, there is a producer, there is a consumer, okay, and the producer is sending the request to the consumer. So in a synchronous environment, the producer sends the message to the consumer and waits for a response before the producer continues its processing logic. Okay. Now, synchronous communication patterns are more straightforward to implement. However, they create something called as tight coupling between the producers and consumers. Now, tight coupling can cause problems due to traffic spikes or any failures propagating directly through the application. Now, for an example, we talked about a three-tier architecture, right? So let's say the application experiences a spike in the client traffic. Okay, so the web tier directly translates that traffic as pressure on the downstream resources. That downstream resources could be a logic tier, could be a data tier. And these resources may not scale to meet the sudden demand, right? You've seen a database scale suddenly because there's a lot of incoming requests. No, the database is going to stop or going to fail or going to be slow at responding back to the client. Likewise, if the downstream resources fail in the logic or the data tier, they directly impact the web tier from responding to the client request. And this is happening because of the tight coupling here. So this is a sample synchronous Lambda function. You can define a synchronous function in Lambda, and this is a sample, right? So if you notice in this handler function, there are three types of arguments that are passed. So the first argument is the event object. Now this contains information from the invoker. The invoker passes this information in a JSON formatted string when it calls invoke, and the runtime converts this into an object. Okay, so whenever an AWS service invokes your Lambda function, this event structure will vary by the service. Okay, the second argument is the context object. Now this contains information about the invocation, the function, and the execution environment. So this is like giving it more information about about the invocation itself, or about the function, or any environment variables that need to be passed. And the third one is the callback function. Now this is a function that you can call in only non-async or in sync handlers. Okay, so this is used to send a response back. Now the callback function takes two arguments. One is an error and one is a response. So when you call it, Lambda waits for the event loop to be empty and then returns the response or error, whatever is appropriate, to the invoker. Now the response object must be compatible with JSON.stringify. Now we talked about synchronous Lambda functions. There are other execution models called as asynchronous events. Okay. Asynchronous communication is a non-blocking request. Okay, so a service can trigger or invoke another service directly, or it can use another type of communication channel to queue the information. Okay. Now the service typically only needs to wait for confirmation. So it will only wait for an acknowledgement that the request was sent. It doesn't wait for a response from the function code. So you hand off that event to Lambda, and Lambda handles the rest for you. So you configure how Lambda handles the errors or retries, and can send the invocation records to a data source downstream, or how do you chain together the different components in your application. So coming back to our producer consumer kind of an example, in asynchronous, the producer sends a message to the consumer and proceeds without waiting for the response. Okay, so for asynchronous information, Lambda places the event in a queue and returns a success response without any additional information. And a separate process reads the events from the queue and sends them to your function. Now, in asynchronous communication patterns are implemented using transportation channels like queues or topics or event buses to create loose coupling between producers and consumers. Now, we talked about tight coupling in synchronous functions. Now we talked about loose coupling in asynchronous communication. Now, loose coupling increases an architecture's resiliency to failure and ability to handle traffic spikes because it creates an indirection between the producer and the consumer's communication, so they can operate independently of each other. So let's take that example of the three-tier architecture we talked about, right? So a message queue can be introduced between the web and logic and data tiers, okay, to enable each to scale independently of each other. So when the application experiences a spike in the, let's say, client traffic, okay, the web tier translates the traffic spike as more messages in the queue, okay, without directly impacting the consumer. Now the consumer can decide, does it want to scale or not? If it sees that there's a lot of messages in the queue, and okay, and this is all automated, by the way. So if the consumer sees, oh, there's a lot of messages that are coming in, let me scale according to that and respond back to the producer. So this is a sample async function. If you can see, this is a sample async function where you can see the handler async function has only two arguments, that is event and context. We just talked about it. There is no callback here, and in this specific example, you can see that the function gets the name of the log stream from the context object, right, and returns it back to the invoker. As simple as that. So although we talked about asynchronous communications and how they can benefit cloud architectures, there are trade-offs to consider with it, right? So asynchronous messaging adds latency to the end-to-end processing time due to addition of a new middleware that you've added, right? So in that example, we added a queue, right? So that adds a bit to the latency itself. Producers and consumers take a dependency on the middleware stack. Now that we removed their direct relationship, now they are more dependent on the middleware stack. So the middleware stack should also scale to meet the demand and be resilient to failure. And there must be a proper care taken to appropriately configure your producers, your consumers, your middleware to handle errors so that messages are not lost. More monitoring is required to ensure proper operations, and multiple logs must be correlated to troubleshoot and diagnose problems. It must be like, oh, something failed, now I have to go through logs of everything just to understand who failed and what, right? Now the tools that you need for event-driven architectures are routers and stores. Okay, so routers abstract the producers and consumers from each other. Like we saw the queue example, right? Sorry, uh, queue would be a store, but routers abstract the producers and consumers from each other. So you can publish to the router, or you can consume from it without the knowledge of other producers and consumers. So in AWS, you have have event routers like Amazon Simple Notification Service. It's a fully managed pub/sub messaging service from AWS. Or you could find EventBridge. We'll talk about EventBridge in our next slide. And if you see event stores act as buffers. So they hold on to these events until a consumer is ready to use them. Okay, like SQS, it's a simple queue service. It's a serverless event store or a queue service from AWS. There is also another service called as Amazon MQ, which is a normal queue service, and it standardizes APIs, and it uses standard APIs and protocols like MQTT or WebSockets or JMS per se. So quickly, we will talk about EventBridge. While we talked a lot about these events or event sources coming from AWS itself, right? But we know that our customers use a lot of SaaS applications like Datadog, or you could see MongoDB in your daily operations. So in 2019, just last year, we created a third-party integration program, and in that we started something called as Amazon EventBridge. It's still quite new as a service. It's a serverless event bus, in short. So it gives you a capability so that you can use data from any of your supported SaaS applications to trigger events in AWS services. Okay. And we also recently launched another integration tool called as Amazon App Flow, which offers no code user interface through which you can bring data from your SaaS applications like Salesforce into AWS, and you can use EventBridge and AppFlow. We are trying to develop a relationship, which will bring exciting opportunities in the future for SaaS-based event sources. But if you are using something already and you want to use that in AWS, this is what you need to explore. So in short, we talked about Lambda for now. We are going to talk about the other services. We also talked very briefly about SQS, the queue service, SNS, the notification service, which can be like a router, and we talked about EventBridge for SaaS applications. So these are some of the services that can help you implement asynchronous messaging patterns. Last but not the least, we have to talk about stream-based or polling kind of event. So in this third type, you can use event source mappings to process items from a stream in services that don't invoke Lambda directly. So for example, you could have DynamoDB streams or Kinesis streams. So from these streams, what happens is the event source mapping creates an iterator. Okay, so there is an iterator for each shard in the stream, and it processes the items in each shard in order. So you can configure it to be like, read only new items that appear in the stream, or you can start with some old items. You can also do configurations on how to handle if the function fails, or how do you do retries. You can configure a lot of things when it comes to stream-based polling method, right? Just to note, anything that is being processed by Lambda is from a stream is not removed from the stream. Okay, so you could have multiple Lambda functions polling the same stream, doing whatever processing, or for example, there's a stream that is coming with just numbers, and you want to do an aggregation of these numbers that are coming in. A Lambda function just could do that. Another Lambda function could do some other processing on that same stream. Okay, so this is important to know that you can do different event execution models in Lambda. Now I'll introduce you to something called as step functions. Quick introduction. Sorry for the bright slide, but that's how it is. Step functions lets you coordinate multiple AWS services into a serverless workflow, so you can build and update your apps accordingly. Okay, and workflows are made of series of steps. So these are different steps that you can define, where an output of one step acts as an input of another next step. So when you break your application into different service components or different steps, you can ensure that failure of one component does not bring the whole system down. And each component can scale independently, the same thing that we were talking. Each component can scale independently, and the components may be updated without requiring the entire system to be redeployed after every change. So if you want to update this section separately, you can take that out, redeploy it or update that and put it back into the workflow. Now, application development is simpler here and more intuitive, because now you translate your workflow into a state machine diagram. And this is how it actually shows in the console. So it translates into a state machine diagram that is like easy to understand, and you can easily explain it to your team members, and also easier to change. Okay. Step functions automatically trigger and track each of your step and retries when there are any errors. So your application executes in order as expected. Okay. So with step functions, you can craft long running workflows such as, machine learning model training, or you want to generate some reports or do some kind of IT automation. You could also build high volume, short duration workflows, such as, you are ingesting data from your IoT devices, or you want to process a stream. You can do that in step functions. The another service I wanted to introduce is API Gateway. Now, API Gateway is a fully managed service which makes it easy for developers to create, publish, maintain, monitor, and secure your APIs at any scale. So it will automatically scale for the amount of API invocations it has. Okay, so it acts as a front door for your applications to access data or business logic or any functionality from your backend services. Uh, to note, API Gateway, you can create RESTful APIs and WebSocket APIs, which will help you, enable real-time two-way communication applications. Just to quickly, it abstracts the implementation so that you can switch. So if you front your application with API Gateway, it doesn't matter what is sitting behind it. It could be a Lambda, it could be an EC2 instance, or you could have multiple backends in the back. API Gateway also gives you network protection, because that is something we do well, and we do at a hyperscale, right? So you don't have to worry about scaling your environment if you're getting into an attack. Let us do it, right? Then you can also have centralized authorization decisions in a policy, a simple policy that you can apply across your API, and it removes the concern from the code in your backend. So you could have fewer bugs in the backend. And of course, API Gateway will help you with the throttling and metering of the API itself. So typical reference architecture for a RESTful microservice would be clients calling an API gateway, and API gateway hosts the, let's say, RESTful HTTP request and response to the customers. So in this scenario, API will call a Lambda function, and a Lambda function will contain your business logic to process whatever incoming API calls are coming in, and it may use DynamoDB as your persistent storage. So DynamoDB persistently stores your microservices data, and it scales based on demand. Okay, so since microservices are designed to do one thing, schemaless NoSQL data store is regularly incorporated in such reference architectures. So let's look at the different endpoints from an API gateway. Okay, so let's say a request comes in from a client, and this could be a mobile device or a web application or any kind of backend service. Okay, and the request arrives at one of our CloudFront POP. POP is point of presence. Okay, one of our POP locations, and CloudFront is nothing but a content delivery network provided by AWS. Okay, it's a service that we provide as a CDN. Now, the request gets accepted here and routed through to the API gateway in our AWS customers region. Okay. Now, the why we use CloudFront here is because if you use CloudFront, if the requests are routed through the nearest CloudFront POP, it typically improves your connection time and will help with lowering your latency for any geographically diverse clients. Okay. Now API Gateway receives this request, then it checks for records in the dedicated cache. So you can configure a dedicated cache in API Gateway itself. So it can cache your API responses. If there are no cache records available in the cache, then it will forward the request to the backend for processing. Okay, so that backend could be Lambda, EC2, or any other, anything outside AWS, any publicly accessible endpoints, or any other AWS service. Okay, and once the backend has processed this request, the API call metrics are locked into Amazon CloudWatch. Now, CloudWatch is a monitoring service by us, provided by AWS. So, if you've worked even like for a month with AWS, you know that CloudWatch is the go-to tool for the monitoring and logs and metrics and all kind of information you can find in CloudWatch. So, it does that, and then the content is returned back to your client. Okay. Uh, so there are, I think a year ago or so, we also released two new features in API Gateway. So on the back end, API Gateway can also take advantage of the private link, VPC private link, to set up tunnels for an API to an integration point. So you could have something like, something that is not publicly accessible. So this was publicly accessible. This is a private API endpoint that could be in one of your VPCs. So you can also have that kind of integration. And last but not the least, on the front end, you could also create something like regional endpoints. So for any in-region requests, a regional endpoint actually bypasses the CloudFront. So you don't have to do a round trip to the CloudFront. You can just have that request by, inside the region itself. Now we talked about API Gateway for RESTful and WebSocket APIs. I want to introduce you to AppSync. AppSync is another fully managed service. It simplifies application development by letting you create flexible APIs, to securely access your backends, to manipulate any data in the backend, and to combine data from different sources. Okay, it's a managed service that uses GraphQL. Stay with me. I'll explain what GraphQL is in next slide. But AppSync is managed service that uses GraphQL, and it makes it easy for applications to get exactly what the data they need. There are other features which we'll talk about in a while. But so before we get into GraphQL, right, let's discuss how a traditional data fetching works. Okay, so let's imagine we have a flight booking application. Okay, and it is backed by a REST API. Now, if my client needs to access a list of flights I have to make an API call to a specific endpoint /flights. Now the API will return with IDs for the available flights. Then if I need more data about a specific flight, I have to use that ID I just retrieved from the /flights and call another endpoint to get information about the flight using flights info endpoint. And maybe I need more now. So I called a third API call to get data about flights by airline and so on and so forth. So as my data requirements get more specific, I need to create different endpoints and customize them accordingly, right? So you can imagine that you it won't scale as well as the API gets more complex with more endpoints, and it becomes a bit difficult to manage it as well. Now there are some advantages to REST. Okay, so REST is a true and tested API technology, with established architectural patterns, and it's based on your standard HTTP calls. However, if you need to build a relationships between those endpoints, or if you need to query the data dynamically, or implement ordering and pagination, or get some real-time notification when the data changes, you need to develop all of these things in the backend, and REST won't give you any support for these features out of box. And that's where GraphQL comes into picture. Right? GraphQL will give you a lot of these features out of the box, where you don't have to keep writing, API endpoints for similar a same data type. You could just have one API endpoint for that data type, and you should be good with. Now, AppSync uses GraphQL. It's a technology created for a web and mobile development with a data descriptive programming model. It follows front end and back end teams so that your front end and back end teams can work independently. It's still emerging, GraphQL. It is emerging as an alternative API approach to REST, has been adopted by many companies. I would definitely suggest you have a look at it if you are a developer and you want to develop APIs. Having information about GraphQL is good. So similar to how we had AppSync, how we had API Gateway, now we have AppSync to front our applications. Something important to look for when thinking of AppSync, right? Uh, AppSync additionally provides you local data access when devices go offline and data synchronization with conflict resolution when they're back online. So this is very interesting, okay, if you think about it. Now, the way it works is with AppSync, the application first reads and writes to a local storage in the mobile device or the web browser, and AppSync automatically synchronizes the data with any kind of backend you have. Okay, so what happens is this will enable you as a developer to build an application that offers a good user experience when the device is not connected to the network and automatically synchronizes with the backend when the network connectivity returns. Now, we all live in India and we know that how great our network is, especially as we go further from our metro cities, right? So this would be a very good way of ensuring that your users have a good experience when it comes with your applications, right? And this is why we recommend AppSync specifically for mobile app developers, because it will make it easy for you to build applications that will work even when there is no internet connectivity. Okay. Quickly, we will look at, I need to do a time check. Okay. So quickly, I have a demo to show as well. So let's quickly go through few of the data stores. S3, it's the most common basic AWS service. So it's a key value object store. So any object like a file, any kind of image file or any static file, any kind of file can be up to 5 terabytes. It can do lot of parallel activities, and it is one of the Lambda event source. Similar to DynamoDB, DynamoDB is also one of the event source for Lambda. As mentioned before, it's a NoSQL key value store with high throughput and low latency, and it can be accessed by API. Amazon Aurora, we are talking about the serverless part of it. So it's a serverless relational database. It supports MySQL and PostgreSQL today. It has managed scaling. What we mean by that is the database will automatically start up, shut down, and scale the capacity up and down based on your application's needs. Okay, so it's a simple, cost-effective option for any infrequent or intermittent or unpredictable workloads if you have, where you only pay per second basis for the database capacity you use when the database is active. We'll quickly cover security and identity. Security is definitely something very important, and I think if you're building applications, you should think of security as your number one priority. You should know IAM if you're working with AWS. It's one of the basic services you interact with on the first go. It helps you provide fine-grained access control to your AWS resources. Cognito, on the other hand, Cognito is a simple, secure, fully managed service again. It lets you add sign up, sign in capabilities to your web and mobile applications. Okay, it scales to millions of users, and it supports federation from social providers like Google, Facebook, and also if you are like enterprise federation with Active Directory or SAML. It also supports multi-factor authentication and encryption of data at rest and in transit. Uh, this is also more important. So before you take your application to production, it's very critical to ensure that your application is fully observable. You know what is happening at microservice level, at a component level, as well as the overall application itself, right? So you need comprehensive logging. You need a lot of monitoring of metrics at various granularities. You need to understand tracing, how to understand how distributed systems perform and how the end user experiences from end to end. So CloudWatch I already mentioned, so you can use CloudWatch assuming you know that, but CloudWatch is a monitoring and observability service from AWS. It collects monitoring and operational data in forms of logs, metrics, events, providing you with unified view of AWS resources, applications, and services, everything that runs on AWS or even on premise. X-Ray is an interesting service. It provides an end-to-end view of your request as they travel through your application. Okay, so if you see there's a client, the client calls API gateway, gateway calls Lambda, Lambda calls DynamoDB, that calls something else. So you can actually see how your request flows through or travels through your application. You can it does a lot of sampling, so it gives you a lot of information about if you need to debug your application, if you need to understand which resource or which part of your application is taking longer to process your request, identify bottlenecks. So it's useful for that. So how do you use X-Ray? Either you use X-Ray in your application. So there's an SDK, a language specific SDK. So you involve that in your application and you install the X-Ray agent on your, let's say you're using EC2, then you can install the X-Ray agent on your EC2 instances. And finally, I would like to introduce you to SAM. SAM is an open source framework for building serverless applications. It provides a shorthand syntax. I'll show you an example of a SAM template. So you can define your functions, your APIs, your databases, event source mappings, so all that we discussed some time ago. And with just few lines of code, what you can do is in YAML format, you can just define that and you give it to SAM, and SAM transforms that and expands it into a CloudFormation template. Now, CloudFormation is one of the infrastructure as code service from AWS. So what you can do is then you can give this, you just say SAM deploy, and then it will just go ahead and deploy this application into the AWS environment. The CLI actually also provides you Lambda-like execution environments locally. So if you're like developing something and you want to, easily catch some issues upfront, you can also do that locally. You don't have to be on the internet all the time. See, that saves a lot of time and money. So it's a sample template of SAM. In the first line, it actually tells CloudFormation, this is a SAM template and it needs to be transformed. If you see the resources, you can see it's a Lambda function. You're mentioning where your code is, which is your starting point, what kind of runtime you have, what are the IAM policies. We are using API gateway here, and it takes care of everything. Like it will create the IAM policies, it will create the API gateway and all the mapping. And the last line, just two lines, it will tell it to create a DynamoDB table with the default 5 read-write units. So quickly, let's go to our demo. In my demo, what I've done is I'm going to show you Amplify. Amplify is not part of this serverless stack, but it's an interesting tool service I have come across recently. So if you are a full stack if you want to create a full stack application, I think you should definitely look at Amplify. In the demo, we're going to use the Amplify console, which is a static web hosting service that it accelerates your application release cycles by providing a simple CI/CD workflow for building and deploying your static web applications. So what we will do is, I'll show it in the demo, but we will connect Amplify to a code repository I have, and we will just see how you change something in the code and it will just do a deploy to my code repository, and Amplify will take care of the whole CI/CD aspect of it. In this demo, I'm actually showing a module from this workshop. You can just search for AWS Serverless Workshop Innovator Island and should be able to find it. And last but not the least, okay, my console just logged me out. But last but not the least, you will also see demo of simple demo, like how API Gateway talks to Lambda, how Lambda talks to DynamoDB and comes back. So I think this is just going to do that. I think my console just logged me out, so just bear with me for a minute. I'm just going to open all of these windows in a second. I think everything just logged me out. This happens with me. Okay, So what I've done is I've created an application. I'll just show you this GitHub page. So if you can go to AWS samples and find this workshop, it's very beautifully done. In each of that, if you click on, let's click app deploy, right? The one I'm showing today, they also have a YouTube video of the whole module. So if I'm going too fast today, just go ahead and watch it on YouTube, and you can run through this application on your own, and you'll learn a lot more, honestly. So what I'll show you is, let's start with some. This is the AWS console, and one second. Okay, that's why Windows open, because it will take time. But I'm using Cloud9. Now, if you understand, Cloud9 is an IDE provided by AWS in the AWS console. So everything, this is an environment. This is just an EC2 instance with an IDE in it, and let it start up. But everything that I've configured is within that environment, so I can actually delete it or clone it or whatever, and I will have the same environment up and running. While it's opening, what I'll show you is quickly is Amplify. Okay, this needs to go down. Okay, so it has started. So this is my code. What I've done is the same code. You can see this code, serverless island. I've just downloaded the whole thing onto my IDE. I've also downloaded a theme park front end. That's as simple as that. And let me show you. Sorry, this thing has to go. Okay. Okay. So this Amplify console, and what I can do is I'll just show you quickly. Sorry for that, my windows all closed, so I'll have to open new windows. And what I've done, this code, front end, my code, I've pushed it to code commit. Now, code commit is similar to your Git repo, but it's just that it's in AWS and it's in a private Git repository inside AWS. So this is the code commit repo that I have created. And how am I doing on time, Srija? Am I okay? Sorry, I'm not able to see the chat.
Yeah, no problem.
No problem.
If you're
Okay.
good.
Okay, great. So this is a Vue application. The front end is developed in Vue. It's a progressive web app that we have uploaded to our private Git, and you can see that it's nothing but just code. What I did in Amplify, I have created it already for you, because as a good chef, I should create stuff beforehand, because it takes a while to run through the whole workshop. But you can select, you can select GitHub, Bitbucket, wherever your code is. You can just select that, and you could say, or you could have your own samples, or want to create it from scratch. You can do that. I just selected code commit and went through the whole wizard. And this is the application that's up and running. And that's my front end. This is actually Amplify console. And if you see, it goes through all the stages. I'll quickly show you that. But what I've done is, this is the front end. So that's a sample front end. And I said it's a web app. So you can select, what is your view that you want. So let's say I want to see how it will look on iPhone, and it will change that. So I've just shown that. And if you see, it's just a simple front end. There's no API that has been called here. All okay. Before we proceed, I just want to change something, because it takes 3 to 4 minutes for it to deploy. So I'm just going to go ahead, save this, git status. Okay, git add, ignore my git commit. I'm hoping you guys can see this. So I'm just going to do clear. Uh, um, no, no, doesn't work like that. So let's do clear, and I'll just pull it up a bit. So git commit, I've already added git commit minus am, module 1, and I will tell you what I'm doing. Just a second, git push. So what I've done is I've actually made some changes in my config file, and I'll tell you what this change is. So, but I've made some changes, and I've said, okay, git push, that should come here in my commits, and it takes a minute for my, but okay, so just now I just put something, and if I go here, should be able to refresh this page, and it should automatically start showing you that it is provisioning the build servers. It's building the environment, building the code for me, and that's it. So it started provisioning it. It will go through the whole cycle for next 3 to 4 minutes. I can actually click on each and try to see if there is any errors and such like that. So moving back, uh, let that happen. I'll show you what has happened there. So what I've done is in the app itself, okay, this is my app, and the place I've changed is the config in my front end. Now, what is this? This is actually the API that I have created in the backend. So let me show you how I created that API. If I go here, and this is my SAM app repository, and let me show you this. I've done all of that already. What I've done is I've written, there's a package.yaml. I've actually created a serverless function. So I've created a serverless function. I told it where the code is, where the start is, that it has to create a DynamoDB table, and blah blah blah. And this code is available in the workshop, so you don't have to worry about all that. I've created these using SAM CLI, and that's the final template that CloudFormation uses to deploy. And in the app, I'll show you the code as well. So if you see the code, it's simple Lambda code that I've written. I'll show you this in the console also. So what I've said is go ahead, deploy this. Let's open CloudFormation. I know it's a lot of services, so please don't get bothered about it. Once you go through the workshop, you'll slowly pick up a lot of these. But that's the backend CloudFormation template. And as I've mentioned in the SAM, it has created a lot of these resources for me. So I didn't have to go through the console and click, 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 click. I actually wrote a template. I'll show you that template also. This is the template that SAM actually generated. So if you could see, this is the SAM template. And I've actually just mentioned few lines of code, and it has gone ahead and created a lot of things for me. And so if you go to outputs, it has said that, okay, this is your API gateway endpoint for your production. Let me show you what API gateway endpoint it has created. API gateway. Let's go to API gateway. I'm just going to look at my, okay, so it's still at build phase. API gateway. Okay. So remember we talked about API gateway. So if I click on that thing that it has created. Now you could see this is my API gateway console. This is one of the methods that I've written, get, and you could see that I can initiate this saying init state. And what is my backend? It's a Lambda proxy. So if I click here, if you see, this is my Lambda function in the backend. To repeat, this is API gateway that is calling a Lambda function in the backend. Now let's open Lambda quickly and go there. So init state function is my Lambda code that this API gateway is. Uh, so init state function, click on that. Let's do this. So this is my Lambda console. And because my Lambda function is just one file, app.js, you can actually see the entire code here. So let's look at the Lambda code. Now API gateway is calling Lambda, that's we have established. Now what does Lambda do? Lambda is creating a DynamoDB client. It is an asynchronous function. Yes, we saw this in the presentation. We are providing an environment variable when we are creating the SAM template. So it's picking up that environment variable. It is actually just going ahead and scanning the entire DynamoDB table that it has, gets the result and gives that back. Okay, so if you see the DynamoDB table is nothing but this. Okay, and this has all been created by the SAM template. So now let's open DynamoDB table. Sorry, go ahead and see DynamoDB table. Let me check on Amplify. Okay, so this has done deployment. That is great. And if I go in tables and ignore the other one, if I go items, you can actually see all the items that it has. Okay. Now, do I want to test the API? Yes, you could ideally, or you could go here and test it. Or what I've done is I already know the API URL. So you can actually find it at dashboard. So it's the same, this API URL, but remember we said /init state. So I've actually opened the same thing in a page. and you can see that, oh, my API is working. Great. So now I've used this API in my front end application, and this is what I actually went ahead and updated initially. So I said, where is my API? My API is this code. I hope that makes more sense. And I pushed the code. I told Amplify, okay, front end, you know which is my API to use. This is my API to use. And now we'll go back to the application. So this is the application, and I'm just going to do a hard refresh because the client is going to cache something. So I'm just did a hard refresh and keeping fingers crossed for the demo gods, and we should be able to see more data. And tada! So this data that you see this extra data that is coming from the DynamoDB table. Okay, and you can see on the developer tools, you can see that okay, it is coming from that API. It's a get method, and then it's populating the entire table contents. That's the demo. Okay, you can do a lot more things in this serverless workshop. You can do a lot of things. So if you go to this website, you can see a lot of things it can do, like it's image processing, like removing green screen from some images, can show you real time ride updates and all. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do. I would definitely recommend you go ahead and do that. Coming back to our presentation, I just want to quickly wrap this up. That to summarize, we saw that APIs are the front door of your microservices. Okay, these are the primary mechanisms through which your services communicate with each other in your microservice environment. Your APIs collectively are like a phone book for your microservices, right? So it gives you the pretty organized view of your microservice architecture. Sorry, you're not going to end up with like lot of just lambda functions here and there, like we call it as a lambda chaos, because now your services are organized well behind well described APIs that you create. And the second common integration pattern that we talked about and discussed and saw today was the events. Okay, so these are events, can be changes in state or any updates that happen. So event-driven architectures can improve the scalability and fault tolerance and the agility by reducing the dependency between the processes and your different teams. So that was our summary of our today's session. If you want to learn more about microservices pattern, this is an amazing blog written by a colleague of mine. This talks a lot of different patterns, I think 19 patterns, where it will talk about a simple web service to how do you create circuit breakers to how do you do stream processing. So these are different patterns that you could have in serverless, and he talks really this in a well structured manner. So if you're interested, go ahead and read that as a stretch goal. As I mentioned before, serverless website, this is your go-to place for the serverless application repository, where people have created their own serverless applications and they've posted that. So there is a repository, you can reuse these lambda functions or these serverless applications. A lot of resources available in the microsite itself. Well architected, I know, I mean, you don't, if you're just starting with serverless, you won't have anything to do well architected with. But then serverless application lens on the well architected, do have a look at the PDF if you're interested to build more. It talks a lot in detail about the best practices, different architectural patterns, and how you can have applications that are fit on the 5 pillars of the well architected framework itself. And I do want to talk to you about free tier. A lot of the services from the serverless portfolio, I think except Kinesis, I guess, most of the services are available in the free tier, and some are even in the always free section. So, for example, Lambda functions, 1 million free requests per month are available for you. So, if you want to play around, test it, you can do that. Even with DynamoDB, I think 25 GB of storage with a few RCUs and WCUs is available freely every month, always, not just for first 12 months, always. And I think I'll take more questions if you have any. Thank you.
So that was huge and amazing. I mean, Rohini. So we got some questions in the Q&A section.
Yes. So I am reading one question from Vivek is, does AWS Amplify support CI/CD? I did show you the Amplify console, and I think that's where I talked to you about. It does a bit for the repository itself. So if you click here, I can show you. So it creates a build environment. It will show you a lot more details. And if you go to build, you can see if the build was successful, if it was not, and any more information that you need to get out of the build phase. You can also have a test phase. My example was simple. There was no test in there, but you could write your own test cases and mention that here. I hope that answers your question. And the second one is, how secure are APIs? So what kind of security measures does AWS API Gateway provide? There are few, I may not be the best person to answer that, but there are few things. For example, it will, if you have some kind of an attack where there is a lot of bombarding of requests at the API gateway level, we will take care of that. We will absorb that attack at the API gateway level itself. You can have a lot more authentication and authorizers you can define, maybe using Cognito or Lambda functions. You can do that. I think AWS WAF also has support. I'm not completely sure. But then there are a lot of other services that you can use to secure your APIs at the API gateway level. At the very basic, you could do a lot of throttling. You could do a lot of other activities in the API gateway itself. If that is not available, you can always do that CloudFront plus API gateway thing that I showed you. Uh, you can do that, and then you can add a lot of security at the CloudFront level. The next question I have is, Amplify has support for Route 53 configuration. We will have to check that actually. Let's just do a quick search. Amplify route. Sorry, I'm doing it online, but that's how normally I do searches. So you do AWS, the service name, and Route 53, and let's see that. You can actually do that. So you can set up custom domains with Route 53. So that's your answer. I hope that helps. Any other questions?
So,
No more questions. I just don't see.
okay, so I mean that is a request from Vivek Raj, I believe. Like, kindly post Jita's
Ah,
link for the workshop link.
yes, let me do this. This one goes to everyone. That is it. So I've pasted the GitHub link for the Innovator workshop in the chat. So if you're interested, go ahead and look at it.
And for the recorded webinar link, we will release it in a couple of days once we put up the all touch ups, and final one will be published in our YouTube channel.
Awesome, awesome. And do reach out to me via Twitter or LinkedIn, or just subscribe to my YouTube channel because I want to do a lot more. And if you have more questions, feel free to reach out, and I'll be happy to answer those.
Okay. And thank you so much, everyone, and thank you, Rohini, for your dedicating your time for giving us a session. And I hope like everyone enjoyed, and it was so insightful. And
I
thank,
hope it was fun for you all as well. Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a
thank
good day.
yeah, thank you, everyone.